On November 24, 1971, the fundamental rules of American aviation were literally rewritten by a ghost. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're not just recounting the hijacking of Flight 305. We're doing a real deep dive into the character, psychology of a phantom. We're going to look at the tactical world-building of the 1970s that allowed this precise sequence of events to even happen, and of course, confront the absolute forensic dead ends of the D.B. Cooper legend. It's a crazy story where meticulous preparation meets sheer, unpredictable wilderness. Let's get right into it.
So, how do you vanish from the sky? It sounds like a magic trick, right? It's a physical impossibility that forces us to reconcile a high-profile mid-air heist with a total, traceless disappearance. Think about it. A man executes a flawless hijacking. He's surrounded by a vigilant crew, tracked by federal authorities on the ground, and then just completely ceases to exist. No trace. To really understand the mechanics of this vanishing act, we can't look at it through the lens of modern security. We literally have to rebuild the world that made it possible.
And that world brings us to 1971. If you know anything about the aviation landscape of the early 70s, you know it was an era of profound innocence and, frankly, extreme vulnerability. It was the absolute perfect incubator for the crime that was about to unfold.
Because, guys, this was an era defined by its total lack of friction. I mean, there was no TSA, there were no advanced body scanners, and practically zero identity verification. You could literally hand over a wad of $20 bills for a ticket under a fake name and just walk right onto a commercial Boeing 727. Now, hijackings were actually an absolute epidemic at the time, but the airlines, they treated them more like expensive nuisances rather than lethal existential threats. Cooper didn't just exploit a loophole in some robust system, he completely weaponized the era's inherent trust. He recognized a vulnerable, unregulated environment and just walked right into it, completely uncontested.
Witnesses really distilled the man known as Dan Cooper down to three hauntingly simple words: calm, polite, and ordinary. Now, here is where the psychological profile gets truly terrifying. Picture this. He's sitting there in a dark business suit, he orders a bourbon and water, he's smoking a cigarette, completely regulated. The sheer dissonance between his relaxed, thoroughly ordinary demeanor and the extreme violence of his premeditated plan points to a highly disciplined, almost sociopathic level of control. He wasn't some desperate guy acting on an anxious impulse. No, he was perfectly comfortable sitting right in the middle of all that tension.
And the moment he hands that handwritten note to flight attendant Florence Schaffner, the trap snaps shut. The brilliance of his threat was honestly how quiet it was. He reveals just enough, just a little glimpse inside a briefcase showing red cylinders and wires to confirm the lethal stakes of the situation. His demands? Highly specific. $200,000 in cash and exactly 4 parachutes. By keeping the rest of the passengers completely oblivious to what was happening, Cooper effectively isolated the flight crew. He created this highly localized, intimate hostage situation where he held absolutely all the psychological leverage without triggering a cabin-wide panic.
The timeline of Flight 305 is just a masterclass in operational pacing. From boarding in the afternoon, to springing the trap mid-flight, securing the ransom by evening, and then finally making that infamous jump into the abyss at exactly 8:13 p.m., he controlled the clock at every single interval. This wasn't just a crime, you guys. It was a tightly choreographed performance where Cooper dictated the rhythm, leaving the authorities scrambling to catch up to a timeline they just didn't control. Now, that runway exchange in Seattle, that was absolutely the most vulnerable point of his entire operation. The plane was grounded. It was surrounded by authorities, yet Cooper never wavered, not once. The passengers were safely released, and the recorded ransom, which was thousands of $20 bills, along with the parachutes were brought aboard. His absolute composure during a moment where, let's be real, most criminals' nerves would completely shatter, proves this wasn't an improvisation. It was a rigidly rehearsed operation. He was perfectly content to wait on the tarmac, entirely trusting his leverage over the crew.
But the request for 4 parachutes? That is the defining tactical masterstroke of this entire heist. It was anything but arbitrary. By demanding multiple shoots, he created a terrifying implication for the FBI. Think about it. He might force the remaining flight crew or hostages to jump with him. This psychological manipulation completely neutralized the FBI's ability to sabotage his gear. He literally forced federal authorities to supply him with fully functional, high-quality equipment by weaponizing their own hostage preservation protocols right against them. It's kind of genius.
So, back in the air, the end game begins. Cooper dictates the precise flight parameters to the crew: low altitude, slow speed, flaps at 15 degrees, cabin unpressurized. He retreats, all alone, to the rear of the Boeing 727, lowers the aft stairway right into the roaring slipstream midair, which is an incredibly dangerous action that had never been attempted on a commercial flight, and then, at 8:13 p.m., he simply steps off the edge.
He traded the pressurized, climate-controlled corporate environment of that cabin for sheer violence. We're talking pitch-black darkness, freezing rain, high winds whipping around him at roughly 200 miles per hour, and directly below him, the rugged, completely unforgiving wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. Wearing a business suit and slip-on loafers, he stepped into a lethal, unpredictable environment, severing himself entirely from the known world. Honestly, the extreme physical shock of that transition is staggering to even consider.
But the moment he left that plane, the narrative abruptly flips from a controlled heist to an impossible manhunt. The FBI was, functionally speaking, flying blind. The brutal weather heavily obscured the exact flight path, aircraft speed calculations were deeply inconsistent, and that drop zone, it was effectively a continent-sized haystack of dense, mountainous forest. The environment just swallowed him whole, causing one of the most sophisticated investigative agencies in the entire world to experience a complete and total breakdown of authority and control. And the physical evidence left behind was infuriatingly sparse. It acted like a tantalizing ghost of the man. He left a cheap clip-on tie on a seat, which eventually yielded microscopic traces of titanium and industrial particles. This pointed investigators toward a potential background in aerospace manufacturing or maybe chemical engineering. There were also some smudged fingerprints scattered around his seating area that offered leads but no definitive matches to any existing database. It was just enough forensic material to haunt investigators for decades, but never enough to actually secure an identity.
So, for 9 years, the trail goes absolutely cold, a total void of information. Until 1980. In 1980, a young boy digging on a sandbar along the Columbia River unearths bundles of highly deteriorated $20 bills. The serial numbers? A perfect match for the ransom. But this massive discovery was a complete forensic paradox. Because the buried cash didn't solve the mystery, it actually fractured it even more. How did it end up on that specific beach? Did it wash miles downriver over the years? Did he bury it there himself shortly after landing? Or did he survive just long enough to hide it before succumbing to the elements?
Which brings us to the ultimate ideological clash of the Cooper legend. It's a debate of lethal environment versus masterful preparation. Skeptics argue that the brutal weather, the pitch darkness, the hostile terrain, and his wholly inadequate civilian clothing made survival a literal physical impossibility. But the believers, they counter with his deep tactical knowledge of aircraft operations, his evident specialized training, and that unnatural calm in the face of death. So what was it? An impossibly reckless suicide mission or the perfectly executed escape?
The FBI chased hundreds of ghosts over the following decades. You had Richard McCoy, who executed an almost identical skyjacking months later, but he couldn't be definitively placed in Seattle that November. Then there was Kenneth Christensen. He had the crucial insider airline knowledge, but investigators lacked the definitive proof to actually make a case. And Robert Rackstraw, he fit the special ops, highly trained military profile perfectly, yet the evidence against him remained entirely circumstantial. Every single promising suspect eventually dissolved into just another frustrating dead end. To this day, this case remains deeply embedded in the American psyche, and it's easy to see why. The narrative themes here are the perfect architectural design of a myth. You have a victimless heist against a massive corporation, a polite, phantom suspect who never harmed a single hostage, a truly cinematic leap into the pitch-black unknown. With no body ever recovered and absolutely no definitive answers to anchor it to reality, the mystery proved so impenetrable that the FBI officially suspended their active search back in 2016. Which leaves us with a lingering, haunting reality. Somewhere out there, deep in the rugged wilderness of the Pacific Northwest, buried beneath decades of soil, rain, and forest overgrowth, does the final clue to Dan Cooper's fate still wait to be discovered? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Until next time, keep questioning and keep looking for answers.